This was a big project. This is a portable life escape game. In total, there are 6 props and 1 big treasure chest. It took me over 5 months to build this entire game. It took 6 microcontrollers, 1 Raspberry Pi, over 3 meters of LED strips, an audio system to play music and sound, over 30 sensors and 12 buttons to build this. And the game is controlled via a small website. And most challenging of all, I only had a budget of $1,000 to build this game, and it was almost enough. I overshot by about $100 in the end. And here is how I built it. First, I modeled all of the chests that I had to build in Fusion 360. But modeling is really boring to see, so here's the finished results, and here are the 3D printed parts. The rest of the chest was cut with a laser from 3mm MDF wood. This first chest is supposed to look a little bit like a beehive, which is why almost all of the design aspects have these hexagon patterns on them. Assembly was really easy. It was just a matter of gluing all the parts together and leave them to dry for a few hours. One really cool trick that I used when I printed this part is changing the infill of this 3D printed part. So you can choose different infills, and this infill has this honeycomb pattern. So if you hold it against light and will later light up, you can see the pattern shine through. This is a really easy to do and cheap effect to add to the immersion. Speaking of light up, here are all of the LEDs that I have to solder together and glue to the bottom of the 3D printed part I just showed you. Soldering all of these LEDs and gluing them into place took me over 4 hours to do. This was very tedious, but it was well worth it in the end, as you will see later. I glued on some hexagons to the side of the chest as an additional design element. And I also used a filler to fix some of the gaps along the glue line. The first chest is almost done. All that was left to do is cover some of the parts that I don't want to paint with some tape and then prime the entire chest. Finally, I had to remove the tape and then paint the chest. I started by applying a base coat of a dark brown, and then I used my airbrush to highlight some of the areas in a light brown. Finally, I used an old sponge to paint some of the details in a very dark gold. And the first chest is done. Off to the next one. The process is pretty much the same as for the first one. I laser cut all of the parts out and glued them together. There's one exception though. For the top part of the chest, for the lid basically, I used a Dremel to add some damage and some wear and tear, because these chests are supposed to be very old, and all of that damage will help convey that. Finally, just like before, I fix all of the gaps and then prime and paint the chest. I used my airbrush to add a subtle gradient, and I also added some very dark gradient around the corners to give it a bit of a depth. Finally, I painted some of the details in a gold color to match the main big chest. And with that I'm done. Also, I built 2 of these, pretty much the exact same way. Before I show you what is going to be inside of these chests, we are first going to build the dirt patch that is going to be in the big chest. By the way, I did not build the big chest. The big chest was given to me by the customer. The concept for the game said that there is supposed to be a patch of dirt inside of the chest that will later open up. Now, to make it possible to open this patch, I had to build the patch of dirt as lightweight as possible. So I built the majority of it out of foam. The core of the dirt patch is made out of packaging foam that I just had lying around. I covered it in a thin sheet of EVA foam, and then I added some toilet paper that I glued on with some white glue for texture. I added some more texture using some gesso, and then finally I primed and painted the whole thing. Remember, I only had a budget of around $1,000, so using foam and stuff that's generally very cheap was a must here. Finally, for the final layer of detail, I used a static grass applicator to add some fake grass. I also added some fake moss and some fake leaves to hide all my crimes. And with that, the patch of dirt was done. Now let's get back to the miniature chests. There was a lot of very boring programming involved, so I will spare the details. But basically one of the chests now has a chameleon and a screen in them. Those are controlled by a Raspberry Pi, and if you enter one of these plates, then the chameleon will change its colors. I will not explain how the riddle works here, you will have to play that on your own if you want to find out. And the other chest now has a bunch of squirrels and acorns in it. That, again, is part of the riddle. Finally, I also laser cut and assembled 2 more boxes that will go on the inside of the chest. And I also made this wide riddle prop. I did not record the process of making this because I was running low on time, and it's basically the same approach as with the other 2 smaller chests. Lastly, I had to program the big chest. There are a lot of practical effects on the big chest, for example this. Or this light effect with music. There is a ESP32 microcontroller inside of the big chest that creates its own Wi-Fi access point that you can connect to with pretty much any device. Then you can visit a specific website that lets you control the entire game through this button layout. What you just saw is just a small part of the game, as you can see by all of the buttons, and I don't want to spoil the entire game. There is an owl prop that I did not cover at all. There is also a telephone that you can use during the game, and a bunch of other stuff that I didn't even show you. If you want to play the game, there is a link in the description down below, but unfortunately you have to be in Munich, Germany to play this game because it is only available there at the moment. In total, it took me well over 300 hours to build this entire game. And now, here is the finished result.